think a piece of me died that night, and I don't know if I'll ever get it back, that childish love for the Philadelphia Flyers, and probably always had a chip on my shoulder about it, probably to this day, probably don't even realize it.
Colby Cohen, from Philly standout to NCAA champion at Boston University, he has lived every chapter of the athlete's evolution. After scoring the legendary overtime goal in the Frozen Four and being drafted 45th overall into the NHL, he successfully pivoted from the pro grind to the broadcast booth. Today, he is a father, a premier hockey analyst, and a coach for the New Jersey Titans, dedicated to sharing the raw human growth that happens behind the headlines.
I remember going home almost the first 3 months of the national team every night. I would just lay there and look up at the ceiling and tears, but I was so tired, so physically and mentally tired every day.
When did you first realize that it's not about just the work anymore? It's about something else.
I'll never forget, because it was on my birthday. He told me, your career's over in 2 years. He said this in front of the whole team. He said, 1 more year here and 1 year at BU before Jack Parker realizes that you suck. And I carried that with me. I'd been playing pro for 2 months, and phone rings. It's the GM of Colorado. And he said, we just traded you. And I'm like, really? The world was just spinning around me.
Mindset is actually the collective. It's more about the collective and what others are seeing in each other. How did you change? How do you see it differently? Welcome back to the Evolving Athletes podcast, where we explore how high performers grow, adapt, and evolve across every chapter of their life. Today's guest is someone I've known for almost 20 years now, someone I've watched go from a gifted Philly kid to an NCAA champion, to an NHL prospect fighting for his spot, to a broadcaster, a father, and now a coach guiding the next generation. Oh, yeah. Today we're talking to Colby Cohen, a guy who's lived every stage of the athlete's evolution, the hype, the pressure, the expectations, the setbacks, the reinvention, and the responsibility to pour wisdom into others. Colby's one of those rare players people talked about early, the kid who always played up, always got the big opportunities, always stood out. He won a national title, right, of championship with Boston University, scored the overtime goal in the Frozen Four, and got drafted 45th overall in the National Hockey League, and experienced what it's like to be in an NHL locker room chasing a Stanley Cup. So we'll dive into that. But he has also experienced the other side, the injuries, the trades, the grind, the identity questions along the way, and the moment every athlete faces when the playing chapter starts to close. And then he did something most players never prepare for. He reinvented himself on the fly. Broadcasting, analysis, podcasting, storytelling, and now coaching in the North American Hockey League with the New Jersey Titans. So full circle from where he played as a youth. So today it's about the evolution behind all of that, the mindset shifts, the internal battles, and the real human growth behind the headlines. So we share a lot of history as well. Same Philly roots, Jewish upbringing, demanding fathers, similar environments that shaped, how we saw ourselves as athletes and as young men. So this conversation is going to go deeper because we lived in places of the same similar stories. So Colby, welcome to the Evolving Athletes podcast, my brother.
That was quite an introduction. Most of the time it's quicker than that, or people are swearing when they introduce me. So it is... it's funny, it's really true though. I mean, I guess I don't think about it that much, Vinny, because you and I talk so frequently. You're somebody that there's not a week that goes by where you and I aren't communicating in some way, shape, or form. And so I guess I don't ever really take a step back and think about that, you've seen that, I've seen you evolve, obviously, as a person from when we first met. But when we first met, I was so young, you know what I mean? And I was in my, mid-teens, probably 15 when we really met. I know you right. Knew me before that, but when we really started to know one another, maybe I was 16 or 17. But so I've seen the changes in your life, and then we ended up working together in the NHL, and, the time we spent away from the rink together as just friends, not, just colleagues. So I guess it is really true to think you really have seen the meat of my life. You've seen more of it that, you know, the bigger percentage of it than most people other than maybe my family members.
Yeah.
You're right. And I'll tell you, and I say this to you all the time, I wish I had somebody like the way you are now when I was 22, and had someone to talk to and lean on when I was 22 years old, because, you know, now I lean on you all the time for help and advice. And, you know, sometimes I'll say to you, am I looking at this wrong? Help me look at this from a different angle. And so, when you went through that whole introduction, it was almost like I'm sitting there, I'm smiling, and I'm kind of laughing too,
Yeah. Sure.
because I'm thinking, wow, yeah, I mean, you've seen the good, the bad, and the ugly,
Oh, yeah.
and probably started with the ugly for me, and then went the other way, and then I think back to this summer when we're all sitting there at First Watch having breakfast.
Yeah.
You, your kids, your wife,
Yeah.
Marissa, myself, my wife, my kids, and it's like, holy shit, yeah, wow, we've climbed the gauntlet together.
Oh, yeah. It's so true, man. And I appreciate that perspective and sharing that too, because it's unique, right? Like that's the cool part about it is like, yeah, like being able to, I think as you mentioned that, what it made me think of is like what a lot of people forget is we think mindset and all this stuff is all about you and how you see it, and that's it. And I made this argument for a while, right? Is like mindset is actually the collective. It's more about the collective and what others are seeing in each other. And so it's cool that as you point that out, right, of like, yeah, it is wild of, I've observed, you've observed me, and we've both in that ecosystem have watched the growth and the evolution, right, in each other. And it's always funny when you think about it, the bad, the good. It's more about just, I like to think of it as just ignorance. Like we just didn't know. We didn't know. And that's what I love about, what we're trying to accomplish with a show like this is to get to know, well, how did you change? How do you see it differently? And that's the cool part about our relationship is we can have a very open conversation about different parts. One part you're going to love as we get started off and we dive into, which is going to be a really cool lens for our listeners to listen to. But before we step into that part of your youth, the first thing I wanted to kind of start off was take me back to Philly, back to Illinois, before the draft, before BU, before the Frozen Four stuff, the program. When did you first realize that you were good, right? Not just I love hockey, but I'm different as, a young kid. I'm ahead of my age group. What was that first kind of like moment for you as a kid? Take us back.
And I don't share this often. I really don't, because it gives you a glimpse into probably the level of arrogance / confidence / lack of self-awareness that I had as a youth. And most people who know me know, like, the arrogance still lives within me and the confidence still lives within me. I just am a lot more self-aware of it now.
Yeah.
But, Vinny, like, I remember when the Core States Center opened, and, we're going back some ways when we think about when the Flyers started playing in that building. And I remember being there. If it wasn't opening night, it was close to it. And the Flyers played the Florida Panthers. And, I think back to like Kim Johansson and Yanni Niinema and, defensemen at that age, at that time. I couldn't have been more than 10, probably. And I remember sitting there and just watching how controlled the NHL was. To me, hockey just always made sense in my brain. Even though it's so chaotic,
Right.
it just always made sense, especially the NHL. And
Right.
as a 10-year-old kid, I sat there and watched these guys, the best in the world, Vinny, and I thought, I could do this. Like, I know they're better than me, but I feel like I could do this. And I would watch those guys, and like, I still remember Niinema was 44 and Kim Johansson was number 5, and, Eric Desjardins, number 37, right? Like, guys that I watched, and even like John LeClaire was my favorite player. And I would watch these guys, and I just, I'd think like, I'm almost as good as these guys. Like, I'm not that far away from them, which is an insane thing to think. And I believed it. And I think part of why I believed it, and we've talked so much about this, is I had a lot of access as a kid. In training camp, I used to get to jump on the ice sometimes after practice when Roger Nielsen was the head coach of the Philadelphia Flyers. Like, I'd get to jump on the ice and pass pucks with some of the guys. And at the old, I don't even remember what the practice facility was before Voorhees. I can picture it, but I can't remember what it was called.
Coliseum.
The Coliseum. And and it jaded my perspective, thinking like, wait, I could go out and do that drill with these guys at such a young age. And, it was Roger Nielsen who told my dad at a really young age, because I'd spend 3-4 weeks of summer in Canada, in Lindsay, and I'd stay at his lake house, at Roger's lake house. He treated me like a family member, and I would do his camp during the week. And then we'd stay, my brother and I, at his lake house on the weekends with his family, and he had kids and friends. And then we'd go back to the camp the following week. And he told my dad at a young age, get him up, play him with older kids. Hockey in our area was good, but it wasn't great yet. It was still pretty limited. My dad felt like it was okay for me to struggle a little bit with older kids, bigger, stronger, older kids. And I think back to, my first year playing with the American Eagles. I was 9 years old, playing on the Pee Wee minor team. My older brother was on the Pee Wee major team. It was the only way my brother could play on we had to be on the minor major team, because otherwise my dad would have been on such a wacky schedule driving us to Wall, from Villanova, which is an hour and 15 minutes. But I wasn't, I was 9 with Pee Wees, right? With 13-year-olds. And so, I didn't play my game. I remember 3-4 shifts every game, as I was still a forward at the time. But practices were invaluable, because I got to practice 2 days a week with my team and 2 days a week with my older brother's team. So I was getting practices, Pee Wee major, Pee Wee minor. And my dad's mentality was, it was okay for you to struggle. It was okay for it to be hard and uphill. And then eventually I got to a point where it helped me sort of separate. And I think those early years of playing up and just being a little too cocky and arrogant and confident, I started to think at such a young age, Vinny, like, I'm going to be a hockey player. And I would tell people in Radnor and my teachers, and I'm going to play in the NHL. I'm going to play for the Flyers. And people would just ignore, like, they'd be like, yeah, like, from this area, that doesn't happen. Sorry. We're not in Canada. We're not in Boston. We're not in Minnesota, whatever. So, it was young for me, man. And I really started to believe it when I got to 15 years old, and colleges started to come and watch me play as a 15-year-old. And I was playing, with 20-year-old kids, which I was a little intimidated, but my dad was like, this is no different than what you've ever done. And, I went into Syracuse and played in that junior league in Ontario, and the OHL was all over me, and colleges were, and I was like, I'm going to play hockey. Like, I am going to be an NHLer. And that was my only thought. It was not, I'm going to play for college. I'm not, like, I only thought about the National Hockey League, and I didn't know anything about college hockey. Look where we grew up. There was no college hockey here.
No.
Penn State didn't have a team. We never saw the Bean Pot. We didn't get New England Sports Network or any of the networks that carried college hockey, right? I mean, this is pre-streaming, right? So I didn't know anything about it. And so it was all NHL. It was, I'm going to play for the Flyers. Like, my heart was, I'm going to be a Philadelphia Flyer one day. And, I know I'm going to jump ahead a little bit, but I think to this day, when they didn't draft me, not only they skipped me in the first round, they skipped me again at the 42nd pick. I think a piece of me died that night, and I don't know if I'll ever get it back, that childish love for the Philadelphia Flyers, and probably always had a chip on my shoulder about it, probably to this day, probably don't even realize it. But so I thought it at a young age, Vinny, and not like an adolescent kid. It was, I believed what I was saying. I truly did.
Yeah, you nailed it, brother. I mean, I know exactly what you're talking about, and it's crazy. My moment was at 16 at a Flyers game. I'll never forget, behind the net or sitting up, whatever, like 14, 15 rows up. I remember looking on the ice with my dad, and I looked at him, and I was just like, I can be out there. It was the first time I ever had that, like, feeling of, like, I know exactly what you're talking about when you said it, like, but I was 16 at the time, not 10. Like I'm sitting there and I go, I could be out there, man. And I turned to him, I'm like, hey, I gotta feel like it looks like I could be out there. Like I think I can. He's like, yeah, shut up. Okay, whatever.
Yeah.
Give me some popcorn. But to your point, and that's, you bring up two really important parts, man. Number one, the fact that you were already believing that was such a major driver for you in your process, because there was something spiritually in you that was already guiding you and telling you, I believe I can do this. Like, and that to me is like, that's the kind of like, if you want to call it the spirit of God or whatever it is, like, what is that? What is that thing that we just suddenly, like, you could call it passion, you can call it whatever it is, but it's like love. Like, where does that energy out of nowhere come from? Like, why suddenly am I looking at this thing and going like, wow, I can do that? To me, that's one of the coolest things about being a high performer, is that if you talk to most high performers, they've gone through that experience of like, yeah, there was a point where your switch went, you're like, I can do that. It's like something revealed itself from reality. And you're like, man, I can do that. So that's the first thing. But the second part is something that you missed in there, but the exposure part that you brought up is so powerful, beyond powerful. I could not agree more of like, with what your dad was thinking about that, of like, get around the older players, because it's amazing what that reveals to you when you see it. Right. And we actually had Dr. Jeff Spencer on, a few episodes back, and he talked about this, of how when he was young as a cyclist and he became an Olympian and all that stuff as a cyclist. And he talked about how when he was very young, he had that exposure right at the 10-year-old mark, where he was already getting that exposure around big time cyclists. And he realized real quick, wait, I can be around this. I can do it. And so, talk about that part of in other formative years of when you talk about 12, 13, 14, and you're playing on originally back then was the East Coast Selects. And this is something that a lot of people will argue, right? And I like to joke around with one of our boys, John St. Pierre, about this. If you guys ruined spring and summer hockey, because now everybody copied the model when they went to multiple teams, and it became, at first when it was, you were one of the original.
No, the
part.
original. It
The
wasn't
original.
one of the. That was their first ever team they ever had before they conquered spring and summer hockey.
Yep. So what I want you to talk about with that, and just for the audience to understand, these were super, super duper teams. Like whatever you think right now that you're on a team right now, on a youth team, if you're listening, this was nothing like that. No. This was literally, in a hockey term, quadruple A, 5As, whatever you want to call it. These teams were killing championship teams. Talk about that exposure.
Our team had Logan Couture. We had Kevin Shattenkirk. We had Drew Doughty. We had John Tavares. We had Sam Gagne. Myself. It's like, of all the high-end drafted players, I was a second-round pick. I think I was the last player of those guys drafted. I don't think anybody went after 45th overall. And we started as a team together in 8th grade, because we went to that first European tournament in 8th grade when we went to Stockholm, Sweden with that team. And we played against older club teams that were the best in Sweden. I mean, it was a super, you're right. And what was interesting was that was probably the first time to go into a situation and be surrounded by players as good as I was at that time.
Right.
And it was weird, honestly. Like, and I don't remember necessarily handling it well, not being the only and the most go-to guy. Like, I had 3-4 guys on that team that end up being first-round draft picks. Nick Petrecki, I didn't even mention his name. He's another first-round pick. Yeah, he didn't end up playing in the NHL, but still played at Boston College. Like, was a hell of a hockey player, right? So that was difficult, and I think that was an ego check moment, for all of us probably, because now all of a sudden we're all sharing ice time. We're like, there's not a drop off between pair 1, pair 3 as defensemen, and you're surrounded by other really, really good players. And I think what was cool though, and what was unique, was that it was a group of guys that stayed friends.
Uh,
we didn't have the ability to text and Snapchat and all that. Like in 8th grade, we didn't have cell phones at the time. And if we
right.
did, we got to borrow our parents' cell phones in those years. Like, I think that was when I had like a Qualcomm that I would borrow from my mom, cell phone, right? It was like a
Yep.
very flat, skinny, colorless cell phone. So we didn't have the opportunities to keep in touch during the season,
Yeah.
other than like literally going on email and like sending it. All our Canadian buddies had Hotmail and we had AOL.com. That was always how you knew a guy was a Canadian, when they used Hotmail at the time, right?
Oh,
So,
yeah.
that was definitely different. And it was my first experience, like I said, of like on a team where I wasn't the guy. I was just one of the guys. And, I remember that first tournament in Sweden, like really pissing off John. You brought up John St. Pierre. Like, John was sort of the godfather. Him, Travis, Howe, and Joe Templin. Those guys were they were the brains behind that whole thing. And there were a group of others. I know you were, involved, and Travis, Bazzaio, and some of those other names of some of those local guys.
Yep.
And if I'm forgetting anybody, I'm sorry. If you listen to this podcast, but that's such a
Yep.
long time ago. So give me a little bit of a grace on it. But it was definitely something, Vinny, that was a first for me. Just to be surrounded by other players that were really as good and better than I was. I mean, the
Yep.
guys that I all just named, like most of those guys had all-star caliber NHL careers, some of them Hall of Fame careers. I mean, Drew Doughty's probably a Hall of Famer. Kevin Shattenkirk's an Olympian and an all-star in the National Hockey League.
Mhm.
Logan Couture, he probably would have made a Hall of Fame case for himself had he stayed healthy. I mean, his career is over now, which is a shame, but what a
Right.
hell of a player he was as a captain of the National Hockey League. And you just keep going down the list of guys. And so I do think it was probably a little bit of a wake-up call for me of like, wow, like, there's this whole ocean out there of really good hockey players, and that pyramid is just getting skinnier and skinnier. And, you can't go into those situations and, be the guy who rubs the coaches the wrong way, because they're going to find other players that are really just as talented as you are. And I'm thankful that I did develop a good relationship to this day with John and Joe and Travis and those guys.
Mm.
And still we all get to keep in touch and say hello to each other, and those guys will reach out from time to time and vice versa. But I'm sure there were moments at that time when those guys were trying to decide, like, this guy is good, but is he worth having around, because he can be such a pain in the ass when maybe things don't go his way or he gets what he wants. And, that's where I kind of talked about the difference of me then versus me now is really just the self-awareness aspect of realizing that, like, it's okay to be competitive, but you just have to make sure that, like, you're funneling that competitiveness in the right way and not using that energy and creating almost rivalries for yourself. And I don't even mean with players, I mean with
Right.
coaches.
Right.
And that sort of behavior probably reared its head for me when I played for Bruce Cassidy for 4 years, which was a great struggle for me as a player. Albeit I was a pro, it was still a great struggle for me with him. And even looking back now, there are so many things that I realize, like, that was really smart and that was really good coaching and that's really correct. And,
Right.
but again, it's like that sort of head butting,
Mhm.
mentality, like where you're just kind of shutting things down and, you're shutting things off, and you're not funneling the shit out. And so you're just hearing nothing. That
Yep.
was probably, like, again, I'm going so far ahead here and talking about Bruce Cassidy, again,
Right.
a guy that I struggled mightily with. And not because he was a hard ass, because Jack Parker was a hard ass, and I loved
Hey,
playing for Jack Parker, so, those are funny memories to think back on, like those East Coast Selects days and what that's all become now. I mean, great for those guys for what they've done.
oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. No doubt. No doubt. Well, you bring up a really important point, right? Of like, when you think about being exposed to that, right? So there's the exposure part of I'm around these NHL guys and wow, this is awesome. And getting that exposure is amazing, right? But then now I'm getting exposure to my peers. And that's kind of pissing me off almost. Talk about the mindset of like, what do you recall of that part of the challenges that you had with that and what type of influence you had through that? Like, who was it? Was it with dad? Like, who was your sounding board at that time that you were working through to understand this? Or was it just more I had this attitude and I was kind of doing my own thing? Like, or did you have that, like, dad giving it to you? Like, what was kind of like that mindset that you were taking on at that time of struggling with seeing it, right? Because the exposure was phenomenal for you, obviously, to able to go through it. But when you talk about, and you look back on your youth days in that way, what could have been different if you had this as an example?
Well, I probably wasn't talking to anybody. Like my dad was pretty difficult to talk to. He was a pretty quiet guy. Like he really didn't say a whole lot.
Yep.
You know, the expectation was to play well and to play hard. And that would come in a few words, like of a good play, or you played well or whatever. Like it would always be very short. And when it wasn't my day or those things didn't happen, it was just nothing was talked about. It was quiet. It's never yelled. My dad never yelled at me. Like in my life, I don't like, maybe he yelled at me on one hand, you could count it, and it was never about hockey. It was never about hockey, so it was just, he was a quiet, stoic guy, and it was usually, he one thing he did was he did try to always surround me with people that were going to work. Like he put me on the ice with Travis Howe multiple days a week to work on my skating, to work, Travis Howe was my skills coach before skills coach was really a mainstream thing. I was just doing private lessons with Travis Howe at the skate zone in Voorhees. And so, I probably wouldn't have listened to anybody anyway, Vinny, and that's probably the reality of it. And maybe my dad knew that, and maybe he realized that I just need to focus this kid on being on the ice and getting better at being a hockey player, and let him sort of work through everything else. And I really didn't have a ton of adversity in my career until I was a pro. Like I really didn't. I just didn't. Things always generally worked out for me. I was tall. I could shoot the puck hard. Like, I could skate well enough. You know what I mean? Like, but maybe by today's standards, no. But by those standards, yes. And so, we never talked about that stuff. And I don't think he probably wouldn't talk. We probably wouldn't talk about it now, even if I asked him.
Right.
You know what I mean? It just we just wouldn't. Right. And so, I think his goal was always to put me on the ice around people that he thought they knew what they were doing. Because believe it or not, my dad didn't have a great reputation as a hockey parent. Anybody who would know him is probably laughing at me saying, believe it or not. But he really never tried to coach me. Like my dad might have tried to be the GM of the team that I was on, and he would try to bring more talent. Like I remember we were billeting kids like before billeting was even a thing. You know what I mean? Like we were bringing guys in. Like my Titans team one year, we were good, but we needed a goalie. So we brought a guy from Buffalo, and he would stay at my house on the weekends. And like my dad was like trying to be the GM, but he never really tried to be my coach, Vinny. Like he really didn't. And that's probably a pretty big misconception about him and I's relationship and my history. And people that know my deep history was, he never said, well, don't listen to the coach. We'll do it this way or whatever. Like, it was always more focused on more like individualistic. It wasn't like, well, the coach is telling us to play this type of style. And he never said, well, that's dumb, don't do it. You know what I mean? He would actually try to tell me at times, he'd say, find a way to give the coach enough of what they want so you can then do the things that you want. That was sort of the one bit of advice I do remember him giving me through any small, like, struggles, I guess. I mean, maybe the first adversity that I had was at the national team. Now that I say I never went through adversity, I'm thinking about it. That's not true. I'd say my run at the U.S. national team was full of personal adversity. And I think a lot of players went through that there, especially that U17 year. I know I've shared some pretty intimate things with you about how difficult that first year at the national team was for me. Just like physically how hard it was, like the idea that they're going to sort of break you down and then build you back up. Like that was hard. Like I had never gone through something like that, and so, I probably, Vinny, could have used, like I've told you in the past, someone like you, especially at a young age. But even saying that, I probably wouldn't have listened to you. at a young age. I probably would have rolled my eyes, and I probably would have gone in one year and out the other.
Yeah, you nailed that. Cause that's what I'm wondering too, is like, when you look back now, do you kind of look at it and go, man, I wish I had more adversity before I became, a 17, 18-year-old young man, going into, you're going into a U.S. national program, you're going into this, and I had no adversity up until that point. Do you almost kind of, when you look back, wish you had more adversity? Because, the reason I ask that question is you look at a lot of players today, they're getting the best skill money can buy, the best coaches, the whoever's out there, the skill, the mental, all the stuff, and they're being coached to such a way where it's like they're already be given the playbook of how to be a pro in that way. But then what you notice is these young men, when they get up into the professional ranks, they start to struggle with adversity right off the bat because they've
Yeah.
never dealt with it. I make this, you and I know, like brought this up the first time working in the NHL. Right? That was one of the first things I brought up when they would say, I don't understand these guys. Why are they struggling so much? And why can't they get it of being on the fourth line? And I remember it was like so clear to me. I'm like, because the last 10 years, they've been getting their asses kissed all the time. Like, how much adversity have they faced? Like, if this is their first time facing it, that's really hard. Like, talk about that experience of, now that you've kind of been in it and like you think back to yourself, do you think maybe you didn't have enough adversity?
Yeah, I mean, look, I don't. When I look back on my hockey career, and people ask me a lot of different things, like, do you regret this or whatever? Do you regret that?
Not
And
a regret thing, more of like growth mindset part.
yeah, like I want to just make the record clear. Like, there is I don't have a single regret when I look at my hockey career, and I think about the fact that the game has given me so much. And sure, would I have liked to played more games in the NHL than I did? Yeah, of course would. I have liked to have made 50, 80 million bucks or whatever. Like, yeah, of course. But the reality is like, to this day, Vinny, it's hard to trace anything in my life not back to hockey. It really is. I mean, I joke about this all the time. Like, they say, like, hockey players, like, they get access to everything. Like, the old, you outkicked your coverage when you're talking about your wife and stuff like that. Like, listen, like, even like my family, like, I can trace my family like back to hockey. So I don't have any regrets. And I think what's probably the one thing that like I could have used more of was actually just being pushed a little bit harder, like physically pushed a little bit harder. Because when I played that year in Syracuse, which was when I was 15 years old, I played junior hockey. And the coach literally, his idea for development was just go. You'll figure out, make mistakes, never got reeled in. And listen, it was an incredible year. I owe Don Kernan a lot, because that year propelled me onto like the next stage of my career, right? BU, the national team, the NHL draft, all that stuff, right? And so, but I wasn't actually pushed. It was like, no matter what, I was playing half the game as a 15-year-old, and I was putting up points and I was doing well. But nobody said, here, we got to do video. Your defensive zone is a disaster. Actually, you don't even look like you know what you're doing in the defensive zone, which is true, by the way. When I got to the national team, I had no fucking idea. I had no idea what D-zone coverage was, like that there was even such a thing. It was just playoff gut and instinct hockey for me in Syracuse. And before that with the Titans, here. And because I was better than everybody, you could get away with it, right? And so, but I think about some of the physical struggles. Like, I remember like the boxing workouts and the gym workouts and the treadmill workouts and the runs outside and the being screamed at constantly while you were there. Like, it was like a boot camp. And I remember going home almost the first 3 months of the national team every night, right? So, I mean, we'd be at the rink for like 7 hours. Maybe 5 hours, right? You get there, you'd have your workout, you'd have your power skating, you'd have your practice, then you'd have another workout, and then you'd have a video. And like, I would get home and I'd get back to my billet house and I would lay on my bed and, I would just lay there and look up at the ceiling. And tears. It wasn't like I was, sobbing, crying, but I was so tired, Vinny, so physically and mentally tired every day. And it was such a struggle that I would just lay there and my body was just like so exhausted mentally, physically. And like, again, like struggling mentally like you didn't talk about that at that point. And listen, I loved a lot of the national team because I was around you were there. I mean, some of those guys are my best friends to this day, right? I mean, best men at each other's weddings, and I still got my group chat with 4 or 5 of my teammates. I mean, Reamer and Shaddy are two of my bestest friends in the world to this day. And there's a group of other guys, and so you're going through it with them and you're in high school with them, and that part's really fun. And then you get to the rink and it's like, okay, like we're walking on eggshells for the next 5 hours. Everybody was walking on eggshells and you're doing it together, right? But I had never worked that hard to that point. I'd never had to. I'd put the hours in because look, you need all those, 20,000 hours? Like I probably might have put in 50,000, up to that point.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And I did all the power skating and I did all the skills and all the shooting lessons. And so it's not like I was not willing to work hard, but that was just a new level of being pushed that I had never got to. And I don't know how you replicate that other than going through it, which is why I kind of circle back to like, I'm not sure adversity would have helped that. I'm just not. And definitely like the first time in my hockey career, like my confidence was down in the first time ever. And I constantly try to work through it. And I think that I did at times and had some good moments, and then really, really considered leaving the national team after U17 year. Just felt like, you know what, it's just first impressions are everything. And I think I shit the bed on this one.
Right.
And I remember getting the advice from my agent advisor at the time, Jordan Newman, and my parents really supported this. And they said, you know what, you made a commitment and you should go back there and try to make a great first impression. Right. And so I did that. And that all started with off ice in the summer. It was the hardest summer I ever worked. When I went to the national team, I couldn't do a single pull-up. I was 6'2.5" or 155 pounds, and I couldn't do one pull-up, literally not one dead hang pull-up. And when I came back for year 2, I was 6'2.5", maybe 3 by then, probably not, 185, up 30 pounds. I could do 10 pull-ups. And the 10-10 test, which the guys still laugh about to this day, you had to get over 2 minutes on the 10-10 treadmill test. And I got to 2 minutes and 3 seconds. And I went down because I completely blacked out, had a huge scrape on my face from the treadmill because 10 miles an hour, 10 incline, that's pretty fast, right? But I was not going to quit. I was getting 2 minutes come fucking hell or high water. Excuse me. I don't know if I'm allowed to curse on this show or not.
Yeah, why not?
But I went back there and was like, I'm going to like change the perception with these coaches, with Ron Ralston and John Lilly, of my work ethic, of my attitude, everything. And, it started all right. And I went back and again, I did what their criticism of me was like this, and I did it. And it started off all right. And had a good sort of opening weekend or two, and then just sort of fell right back down the depth chart to a point where we were talking after like the first month or maybe 2 months of that U18 year. I remember we played Boston College and then UNH with our U18 team after, and maybe after that weekend, even talking with BU a little bit, I think it was like, hey, he needs to play. He's not playing a lot. I'm not playing on the power play. It's my draft year. And I had the support of BU and David Quinn and Jack Parker. And they were like, we should look at other alternatives for you. And we support that. And once I had that from them, it was kind of an easy decision. And I remember my parents saying, or my dad was like, I'll fly out to Michigan. We'll talk to them. And my agent said the same thing, advisor. And I was like, nope, I'm going to do it. I'm going to go in there. we had a midweek game against Michigan State, which I played in, which we beat them 5-4. I remember because they were national champs that year, and our U18 team was able to beat them.
Mm.
They didn't have Tim Kennedy, got thrown out of the game for a hit from behind early, and so we were able to get a couple on the 5-minute power play and hang on for dear life. But after that Michigan State game, I went into the Scott Monahan's office, and he was the leader of the NTDP at the time. I know he's still heavily involved, and like I told him, this just isn't the right place for me, and I would like a release from the team, and I did it by myself, no agent, no parents, nobody else called, and that was really it. And I didn't have a plan exactly where I was going to go or what I was going to do. I mean, we were going to go to the USHL, but I didn't know where. And some of those things had to be sorted out, but I could always hang my hat on the fact that like I went back and I sort of felt like I didn't just give up, and I the things that I was not naturally good at, which was the off ice, I was never naturally strong. I was not naturally like, one of these guys that you just look at and say, that guy's an athlete. Yeah, I'm tall. I'm 6'4" now, whatever, 215 pounds. But, you wouldn't look at me and be like, oh yeah, that guy's an elite level athlete. It's just, that stuff was always very difficult for me. Like being able to do my first pull up at like 16 years old, like that was a big deal for me. Cause like I literally couldn't even come close. I'd be in gym class in the 5th grade and I was like this good athlete and other kids would do 15 pull ups and I couldn't do one. Right.
Yeah.
So I always felt like I could hang my hat on that. And I, to this day, have a great relationship with the national team. I talk to those guys all the time. I've even like got on the phone with kids before that are considering leaving the national team. And I've sort of not necessarily tried to convince them one way or the other, but just told them my piece and why I did what I did and how I really, really tried to continue to make it work. And I'm always pushing guys to try to make it work and stay. And I know some kids leave that program, not a ton, right? There's not a ton of guys that have done it over the years, but it was just the right move. Like I don't know if I was just mature enough at the time really to make it work there. Like it just wasn't right for me. But there's also a lot of things that I learned at that place that are still in my life every day. Just like life skills that program teaches you. So, I say this all the time. That place is not for everyone, but it sure is a good program. There's a lot of really good things that you get out of being in that program and being in that environment. And again, I truly do swear by it. And I think for a lot of guys, it is a great place to play, develop, learn, and go through those years of your hockey career.
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, so much rich context in there of like the adversity aspect of your process, right? Of like mentally, because it's always an interesting, one of those like conundrums of like life of like, all right, sometimes in order to go through and really find your way, you need to suffer, right? And then the suffering is what really reveals how much you want it or how badly. And to your point, right, you're coming back and it's like, I'm going to show them. So that's that thing inside that really wants to show. Talk about how that transition. So you go to, you head to BU now, you win a national championship, do you ever stop and think about, the moment you had the overtime goal, to win the whole thing, which is unbelievable. Any of the listeners, you want to go back, look on YouTube, Colby Cohen, Frozen Four national championship goal. It's bananas of like, you literally were the guy of, we won on your goal overtime and we're winning the whole Megillah. Like it's crazy.
Yeah.
Talk about what that, had you ever look back and think about the days of the program, what you learned, what this environment was really hard. Because I think a lot of times, especially for the listeners, of realizing like you're caught in a place where you think it's so hard and you think it's so tough, but you can't see the future and realize, man, that adversity was so good for me. Did you kind of have that when you talk about the life skills and what you learned, taking that from the program to what you experienced at BU? Do you remember like thinking like, wow, all that adversity is what really shaped me into becoming a champion and to be able to like take on what that meant to become a champion that season?
Well, look, I could tell you this, nothing was ever that hard again after the national team. Physically. We spend time talking about how physically demanding the national program was as our U17 year. And I remember training camp at BU and the guys being all freaked out about testing and all what we had to do. And like, I remember kind of talking to my roomies that were at the national team together, and we were kind of like snickering under our breath, like, this is not that bad, guys. Like, this is half of what we had to do at the national team. Like, it was almost like, wow, like, this is it. And I felt that way in NHL training camps too,
Right.
because the national team and BU were tough, but like the NHL training camps were nowhere near as physically demanding. You'd have one conditioning test, not 5. The conditioning test at BU's training camp, that was a week long. It was like, oh, congrats, you passed the 10-10. Tomorrow's the shuttle, and the next day's the 5 mile, and then the next day's the 2 mile run. So, I do think going through that and sort of getting my first taste of feeling like I was sort of a whipping boy for a coach, it helped sort of developed a layer of skin that I probably had from being beat up by my brothers quite often, but didn't necessarily ever need to show. And it's funny how that sort of has reared its head in like different ways in my life even since. Just having such a public facing job now, I mean, the amount of criticism that I deal with on a day-to-day basis is laughable. But yeah, like, I remember getting to BU and again, Jack Parker, his nickname, the Iron-Fisted Ruler, right? So how's that going to go? Me, a guy who, has always lived in the gray area of the team rules, who's always gotten away with kind of doing his own thing and always was the best guy. Now you get to BU, like, you're surrounded by some of the best players in the world that aren't in the NHL yet at the time, and you're like, oh wow. And there were guys on that team that I was an 18-year-old. They were 25 years old. They were 7 years older than me. I couldn't even go walk into a bar, and these guys like, we're starting to think about having children. So like, it was obviously really, really different. And I'll say, like, nothing was ever hard again. Even the hard moments at BU, they all felt a little duller because of what I went through as far as like at a younger age at the national program and kind of going through it. Like, I'll never forget this. And it's like, it's funny because, like, I think Ron Ralston's a great hockey coach, right? He's had a hell of a career. I've got a ton of respect for him. I'm so glad that I get to see him now later in life. Now, he was my coach at the national team, and I obviously didn't feel that way about him when I played for him, and I also don't think he probably had many good thoughts about me at the time either. And I'll never forget, because it was on my birthday, our U17 year, and we had practice, and I'm sure I screwed up. Like, I don't remember D zone coverage, neutral zone coverage, whatever. Like, I messed up. I lost my guy. They scored, whatever. It was in practice. And like, he stopped practice, and he said something, and I'm paraphrasing a little bit here, but he told me, your career's over in 2 years, right? He said this in front of the whole team. He said, 1 more year here at this program because we're not allowed to get rid of you, and 1 year at BU before Jack Parker realizes that you suck or that you can't play, and he gets rid of you. And I carried that with me as I went to the USHL. We kind of skipped over the part when I left the national team and I went to the USHL and set records in that league for what I did as a defenseman with putting up numbers. Right. I had like 60 something points in 50 games as a defenseman and had the time of my life playing in Lincoln, and kind of made me love hockey again after a bit of a tough go at the program. And so I remember that. And when I got to BU, like, I was like, still remembering that. Like, yeah, well, you think I got 1 year left? Like, not to mention Ron Ralston was the world junior coach, not my freshman year, my sophomore year. So that was another interesting, dynamic, going to trial for the world junior team, knowing this guy who really fucking despises you as the guy in charge. But it just felt dull. Like, meaning the hardness of BU training camp didn't feel as physically demanding as everybody else. other than guys who were probably used, the other freshmen, I'll say, or the other sophomores that didn't come from there. And Jack Parker, man, he didn't care if you were a freshman. He was the iron-fisted ruler. One thing I think I come to realize now about Jack Parker is he treated every player differently, and I think that's actually okay. I know players are looking for consistency, but you can't coach two kids the same way because they react differently, right? Like some guys need constant positive reinforcement, and if you aren't, you'll strip their confidence and they'll never play again. They'll never get it back, right? And so Jack knew every guy was different, and he towed the line with me of knowing that he had to, be down my throat at times, but he also put his arm around me and made me feel love and got more out of me than any coach I ever had because of that. But, there were also nights when the team wasn't performing, and not really my freshman year, but my sophomore and my junior year when I became more of a marquee player on the team. And he knew that, like, he could come to me and single me out in a way that, like, probably would be very frowned upon in today's world. And it would get everybody's attention because at the time, Vinny, I was an All-American, right? And I was scoring a lot of goals for the Terriers as a defenseman. And, the accolades they started to pile up at that point for me.
All right.
And so, and we had won and we'd had success. But, again, even those moments, like I understood them and it gave me this perspective because I knew this guy cared about me and I knew this guy had the right interest at heart. And even when I was like, this fucker, like this asshole, like there was this other, it wasn't a devil, it was a devil angel. I had the angel saying to me, well, hold on a second. You know what this looks like when you don't feel like they care or they're in your corner, right? So yeah, they might be hard and he might be down your throat. And David Quinn, man, that guy was on me like you couldn't believe. And I needed it and I'm thankful for it. And he's one of the best coaches I ever had and nitpicked at everything that I did. Everything, every practice, every rep, he was up my ass about something that I was doing to try to get me better. And I always took the challenge and I never put my tail between my legs with those guys. And it was because I had that perspective, Vinny, where I felt like these people cared and they were in my corner and it was actually coming from the right place and not just, oh, these guys fucking hate me. I never felt that way about those coaches. Never.
Yeah. That's awesome. And it reminds me of like what we just talked about a month ago or whatever it was, 6 weeks ago, when that book 10 to 25, right? About that high standard, high support. You just beautifully articulated that of like, they were all over me, but they cared about me.
Yeah.
So the high standard that they gave you, they were on you, but they gave you that high love and support as well. And so many people miss that, right? In translation of, right, like, yeah, they were all over my shit, but they also cared about me. Like I knew, keyword what you said, I knew they cared about me. And that is such a part to the process of when you say tough love, 2 words. I say all the time, there's 2 words in there, tough, love. You can be tough as long as there's love. And the way you just articulated that was perfect, right? Because you think about it, right? That's what drove the championship culture that you guys were a part of there at BU in that way, right? It's like, I'm sure, like you said, everyone's treated differently in terms of everyone's coached the way they need to be coached. But I'm sure there was the same idea, high standard, right? Boom, high support, that they were all given that. And that's why you guys were championship team.
Yeah, no, I mean, and I'm trying to like, that's something that I sort of fight with myself as a coach of like, I carry certain things with me of like, okay, like you're not going to do these things as a coach because these are things you hated, but you're like, but some of them might be the right things to do. And I think for me, like I always try to be super straightforward with the guys, even if it's the hard conversation, because I just don't think many people are doing that with these kids.
Correct.
But I do fight myself on that. Like you have to make sure that no matter how frustrated you get, and I do get frustrated at times, and I am demanding, I know that, and I have high expectations for these kids because honestly, like if I don't have high expectations for them, how am I supposed to expect them to have high expectations for themselves, right?
Yep.
But how do you toe the line of making sure it's not just tough and it's tough love, especially with the guys that maybe piss you off a little bit more, or the guys that maybe drive you a little bit more crazy because you constantly talk to them and you do the video and you meet with them and you're still not seeing it, right? And I think that's the challenge, is how do you remain full of tough love? And again, I'm sure there's other players that played for Jack Parker that don't feel the way I do feel. And I know there is, even good players, honestly. But listen, to this day, I still talk to him and his family and his wife and his daughters and their kids. You know, his grandson just played at BU. I mean, that kid was 3 years old in our locker room. He just played his first NHL game the other night for New Jersey. Shane LaChance is who I'm talking about. And so, you know, I don't know why I connected so well with those guys. David Quinn too. Like, there's a list of guys that don't like him, that played for him, and they list the reasons they don't like him. And I'm like, okay, like, yeah, like he did all those things, but like, why was it, they didn't bother me like that. I took them differently. Like, I just digested them differently. And again, I go back to the fact that, like, I think, like, human to human, like, I look at Quinny, like, I'm like, I think that guy on like a human level, if I was in trouble, I could pick up the phone and like he'd be there in 5 minutes. Like, no matter what, he would be there in 5 minutes for whatever I needed. Like, I need you to bail me out of jail at 4:00 in the morning, Quinny. It's Colby. Like, no problem. Not what'd you do? Like, you're an idiot. Like, he just would be there. You know what I mean? And those bonds started when I was an 18-year-old kid. And they live on today as a 37-year-old. And, you know, those guys, Jack just got inducted into the Hall of Fame. Quinny's been a head coach in the NHL, now assistant in New York. And, you know, Mike Bavis, I put him in there too. I talk to Mike all the time. You know, he was, I mean, another guy that, like, you just knew they could be hard on you because you felt the love and the care from those guys.
Right. I think you just nailed it, of like, that's the hard part, I think, to solve. That's so challenging, that I think every coach can admit and every human being can admit. At the end of the day, there's some people you naturally have more of a tendency to believe in, and they can feel that. And I'm sure that's exactly what you're describing, as they believed in you. But then these other players, when they don't, and you don't believe in them like that, you want to help them. You want to give them the support, but there's something innate about the human experience where I just don't feel that towards you. I don't like you in that way. I don't love you in that way, where I believe you really can do something special, but I still want to make you a better human being. That's a major friction point in the human experience. That's why it's so important in a staff, right? Where you have multiple coaches who have different lenses. That's why, you think of it from a diversity standpoint, I believe, right, from just, and the research backs it up, of being able to go, that is the part that gets missed a lot inside of coaching, is that if somebody at least believes on the team, if another person at least believes in that player like that, it's enough. You at least have somebody on the staff that believes, so it can uphold the system. But when that player doesn't feel it, you can feel it. You know whether are they believing in me that I can do something, or is it just they're just giving it to me because they want to care for me, but I can just tell they don't really believe in me. And that is the hardest part as a coach, is when you don't have those mechanisms around where you can feel the human connection, when you can feel the person that's coming at you on that side. And that's challenging. That's challenging to deal with. But as you're working through it from a challenging standpoint, you know, I love how you went from the adversity there and you're figuring things out, and you went through the physical part, what you really mentioned was really important. The physical aspect that you really transform through and realize, oh, nothing else is going to be this hard. Then you get drafted, right? And you're going into your 45th pick, and now you're on that journey. Talk about how your perspective shifted once you became a pro, and now it went from, this is hard physically and I've got to go, to now as a pro, wow, like, it's not about just the work anymore. It's about something else. What was that perspective to you of what did you learn early on, or what did you struggle with that you were trying to figure out as a pro, where, man, this is challenging, it's not aligning? Or was it something you just didn't quite have, and you could say it straight up? Like, what's kind of like your take on that perspective?
Well, look, I got a chance to play in the NHL like almost right away. You know, I barely played any American League games. You could count them on one hand before I come up and I get my first couple of games in the National Hockey League. And played well and got minutes, played 18 minutes, played 22 minutes, like, and
Yep.
then played quite a bit in the third game. And then I got hurt in that game. So I didn't play the third period, but I think I was
Mm,
on pace to play another 23, 24 minutes that night in Columbus.
mm.
And I think the first, like, to me, I was like, wow, like, this isn't that hard. Like, get like, it was like, okay, like, yeah, like, you got to, like, be really mentally ready to defend every shift. But, like, with the puck, everybody's open. I was playing with John Michael Lyles. Like, that guy's a fucking stud. Like, the game was so easy with him. He skated so well. He was always open. Not to mention, like, so was Milan Hajduk, always
Yeah.
open, Paul Stasny, like, go down the list of all the ridiculous players. But
Well, yeah.
it was kind of like, this is a little too easy. Like, what's going on here? I get sent back down, even though I was kind of injured. It was a little bit of a gray area, but like, I don't say anything because it's like, whatever. Like, I'm there. Like, I'm going to keep getting called up. Like, I'm in a good spot. Like, this organization, like, they love me. Like, they love me. I'm playing. The Joe Sacco is a BU guy. He's the coach in Colorado. David Quinn's the coach in Lake Erie. Like, I got all these people that, like, they got my back, right? And
Mm.
then it's like randomly, I mean, this is like, I guess it would have been sometime in November, late November probably. I'm just told that, hey, like, your wrist is worse than we thought. Like, you're probably going to be out for a couple of weeks. And it's like, okay, no problem. And then, like, all of a sudden they're like, wait, we got another doctor's appointment. You're going to go see another doctor today. And I was like, okay. You have no idea what's going on. And I do. And the doctor's like, you're good. Like, you're cleared. You can practice tomorrow. And I was like, that's so weird. You guys just told me, like, this is going to be 4 to 6 weeks last week.
Mm.
And he's like, no, like, you're good. You'll be fine. You'll just tape it up or whatever. I'm like, okay, cool. Like, I'm like, all right, I guess it feels all right. Like, you know how that goes.
Oh, yeah.
So the next day I'm driving to practice and, like, phone rings and it's great. It's the GM of Colorado. And he's like, he said, we just traded you. And I'm like, what? Like, really? Like,
Yeah.
that's literally what I said. I go, really? And I was like, I think I said, for who? And he's like, oh, I can't tell you that. And I was like, where? And he's like, oh, I can't tell you that either yet. And I'm like, and I was like, I don't know what was going on. Like, I don't know if there was something medical. I think, like, I come to learn the story that Mark Savard was coming off of IR in Boston, and they had to get rid of money, and they hadn't got a hold of Matt Hunwick yet, the guy who I was traded for. So, like,
Mm.
and then finally at the end of the call, like 30 seconds later, Greg Sherman's like, okay, like, we traded you to Boston. You're going home. Thanks for everything. Like, good luck. Peter Chiarelli's going to call you. And again, I'm 21. I'd been playing pro for 2 months, 3 months. And I'm like, what? Like,
I mean,
like, all right, I remember, like, the next phone call was to Quinny, my coach in in the American League. And I was like, so I guess I shouldn't practice today, right? Like, and he's like, no, like, you can't, like, you gotta, like, he literally said, like, go pack your house, your apartment, and, like, get your gear, and, like, you got to go. And then I got a phone call from Peter Chiarelli. I mean, this is before Twitter, like, like, this shit wasn't, like, on social media or whatever.
oh, yeah. Of course. Yeah. Yeah.
And they're just like, hey, just, like, when can you get here? And I'm like, like, I don't, like, let me just give me a couple, like, can I have, like, an hour? Like, the world was just spinning around me.
Oh, yeah.
And that was tough, just because in Colorado it was, like, this really familiar place, even though I wasn't there that long. Like, I'd been going to rookie camp for multiple years. I knew everybody. I knew the coaches. Like, I didn't know shit about the Boston Bruins, even though I just played for BU. I didn't know who the coach was. I didn't even know where their American League team was. I didn't know anything. Again, this is before social media. Like, this stuff was not in our face all the time like it is now. There was no, the NHL app. I mean, yeah, like, sure. I mean, I honestly, like, I still had a BlackBerry, so I didn't even have an iPhone. Like, iPhones were around, but I was still using a BlackBerry at the time.
Right. Oh,
It's
yeah.
not like I was going on the NHL app every night, right?
Mm.
Like, the way you knew what was going on was, like, you watched the NHL team played, and you'd, like, hope for an injury, and then you'd, like, wait and look at your phone and hope you're getting called up.
Right.
So, I packed my car and got all my shit together, and I literally got on the road that night. I still remember I got like the worst speeding ticket of my life on that ride. Going down the like right as I crossed into Ohio, I think from or into PA or something like that. I don't remember exactly where I was. I think I was just into PA from Ohio, making my way to across the country to New England. And I got like a horrific speeding ticket that ended up costing me like 3 months with my license. But it was a shit show. Like I'd never really like thought too much about it. I was kind of like, all right, I guess I'm gonna go play for the Bruins now. And like I get there and like I don't know a soul. I don't know any players in the NHL team. I don't know any players in the AHL team. I don't know anybody. I don't know the coaches. I don't know their reputations. Like I didn't know I was going to play for Rob Murray, who was like a nut job American League fighter coach, and Bruce Cassidy, who, again, one of the best hockey minds I've ever been around, but also one of the biggest dickheads I've ever played for. And that was like, I was injured, so like I wasn't even healthy, and I had a wrist injury that like I ended up not like before I ever played a game in the organization, I ended up with a full length cast because they didn't want me moving my wrist for 4 weeks. So, I get there, I'm injured. It was a real difficult transition for me. It really was. Going from a place where, again, I was with 3 or 4 of my BU teammates in Colorado, BU coaches, just everything was comfortable and familiar. And it was a tough transition to a new place that it was so foreign to me, even though the city wasn't foreign, but everything else was.
Yeah. And I think that's what so many people talk about today, right? Of like the psychological safety aspect, right? Like of Amy Edmondson's work of like talks about, yeah, like the comfortability around an organization. Because I think a lot of times organizations today misperceive connection with, oh, I just have to talk to you more and you'll feel fine. Whereas everything you're just describing right now is like, I didn't feel safe with you guys. With those guys, I felt safe. I knew them. I knew what I was getting into. I understood the culture. But here, I have no idea what's going on. And that as a pro, that weighs on you. That weighs on you big time when you don't feel that connection, when you don't know anyone. Like, and especially as a pro, we both know, like, it's a different animal. You're not, it isn't the younger days, amateur days where college, everything taken care of, juniors, everything taken care of. There's so much attention to everything taken care of. Pro, it's so much more of you're on your own now. You're on your own. There's a lot of stuff you got to figure out. There's potentially cliques on the team. Veterans are kind of hanging out. Maybe some now rooks. Like, there's way more of that going on. So the connection aspect, right, of like that attachment.
And I didn't hear. I remember like I finally get to Providence, and they're like, "Yeah, we're gonna put you in this apartment with 3 other guys." And like I walk in, and it's like this gross like sort of apartment, and there's like 3 guys I don't know, and like I don't even have my own room in the apartment. And I'm like, I remember like the first night, I'm like, they put me in this apartment, and I'm like, I called my agent and I was like, this just like I need to be in a hotel. Like I need my own space. Like I just like I'm still and I like I probably should have just kept my mouth shut, because right away first impression is, oh, this guy's a prima donna. He won't stay in the in like the team sort of like apartment at the Renaissance building. He needs a hotel room. But like, yeah, I did. And like, I don't regret that either, even though, again, it didn't shine a great light on me, but I that's what I needed. Like, I needed my own space. Like, I needed to be able to talk on the phone. I needed, like, it was a whirlwind for me,
right,
getting traded. It's just not something you think about when you're a high draft choice and you've only played a couple of games for your team. And they went well. So, and then the biggest struggle, Vinny, like in Colorado, I knew what they wanted from me.
Right.
And they knew who I was.
Yep.
And in Boston, I never had any, like, it was the biggest, it's the one area where like, I just, I feel like I never had any fucking clue what they were looking for from me. And that's not, listen, like, I'm not blaming them by any means. Like I didn't perform. I didn't produce. So it is on me and solely on me. Why it didn't work out there and why I wasn't a better pro and I just wasn't good enough. But the reality is like I never really felt like I knew what they wanted. It never quite fit. I never really felt supported. I felt like they almost maybe felt pretty quickly like this was a bad trade for us.
Right.
And they traded away a guy who played like 800 games in the NHL for me 1-for-1. So it wasn't like they sent draft picks and this and that. It was a 1-for-1 trade. Like I was supposed to be a good player
Right.
in the National Hockey League. That was sort of
Yep.
the billing for me, right? And so that was a challenge. Just never really feeling like I don't think Don Sweeney and I ever had like a good honest relationship. And he was the GM in Providence at the time, the assistant GM of the Bruins. He later took over, obviously, as head GM, but it didn't feel that way. Like in Colorado, it felt like my success mattered to them, and that was just like a feeling I had, and I never got that feeling there, and and I didn't perform. So like, regardless of what feelings I had, I still have a job to do, literally a job to do, perform, and I never did.
Yep. Yep. Well, and again, those variations, right? When you talk about it's hard. Again, clarity, that's one of the biggest things we do with our work is making sure the players are very clear. What are you solving for? What do you know is expected? What's the role? When that's not there, that's really hard for both parties. Like it doesn't matter. Like when there's no clarity and there's no care, right? When what, I don't feel they believe in me and I have no idea what they want. Well, now I got to produce. Well, producing where you're just kind of shooting and you have no idea what to produce, how to do it, right? Especially as a young man, that's super hard to figure out. So, the challenges make sense from that standpoint, right? Coming up, obviously now, people try to be better at that, but now it's interesting, right? We kind of go into your story of, then you kind of transitioned into, you said, all right, playing days, I'm going to move on. And let's talk about the next phase of like with the broadcasting and how you kind of, stepped into that of like, you took usually a lot of people go into coaching or they do something else that I played, so I'm going to go with that. You get into broadcasting part of talk about what that kind of transition was of, I'm going to go do this. Because one of my favorite stories, and this is as a tool, right? That's really fascinating that you shared with me before was that it's not random to think about you getting into it when as a kid, I remember you sharing with one time that you would do play-by-play whenever you played when you were younger.
Yeah.
You would just do play-by-play when you were just messing around.
In my head, yeah. Like I was just talking about what was happening in the game, like to myself in my head all the time as a kid.
Yeah. So that's so cool that there's a natural disposition already there. But talk about that transition of when you went from the playing days and the lessons that you learned there. How did that help you to step in, to go into and, do the broadcasting? Like, how did it feel for you of, all right, I learned all these lessons, I gained all this knowledge, and then I'm stepping into something that, is basically different from playing, but there is similarity. There's the same. Talk about what that connection from a mindset perspective of what made broadcasting feel easier for you that you recall again, as that visualization exercise, but just in general, like playing, how did that feel natural for you to go in and step into it? Because you do a great job. Personally, I love it. I think you do a phenomenal job at it. So,
well, my older brother and my mom to this day, they kind of laugh about the fact that they all thought I had an imaginary friend when I was a kid, because we had a room in our basement that my dad put sport court in and then later fake ice.
yeah.
We had little boards and, it was like a little hockey room, right? And I lived in it. And not because my dad sent me down there. I lived in it because I loved being down there. And honestly, being down there myself was like my favorite times. And I could be all five guys on the ice and the goalie and win the Stanley Cup. But I would do what you're talking about. Like I would be calling big Flyers moments, or I was an Avalanche fan as a kid too, because Joe Sakic was a guy that I just loved as a player or as a kid. I had his poster and jersey and whatnot, but they thought I had an imaginary friend because I would literally be calling the action while I was physically moving around my little rink in my basement, doing different things,
doing visualization naturally.
Just like, again, something I saw from the Flyers game, a big moment. Whatever, like the Red Wings and the Avs had that rivalry at that time in the 90s, and those games would be on ESPN and shit that you'd see in those games, just everything, right? So yeah, like that was definitely something I did, and I did it on the ice too. Like more to myself, I'd sit on the bench and like just go through what was going on and what I thought should have happened or whatever, and then yeah, like similar to hockey, Vinny, I probably went into broadcasting thinking a little arrogantly, like, yeah, I could do this. I'd watch on TV. I'd be like, yeah, this isn't hard. And it was really hard.
Yeah.
And my early days of broadcasting, especially my first days of calling games, I think in a studio, you can sort of protect someone. But
Yeah.
when you put them in the booth, they better know what they're doing. And I'll never forget, like I had done like maybe one game in the booth, and then I got asked to do the NCAA tournament, and I ended up with a regional in Cincinnati, Ohio that had Michigan and North Dakota, two very passionate college hockey fan bases. And it was so bad that, like, I'm telling you right now, I know this to be true because they've told me. The committee went to ESPN and said, you cannot have this guy back. He can't do this.
Wow.
And thankfully, my boss at the time, John Vasallo, was basically like, look, you're not telling me what to do, and I'm going to work with him, and we'll see. Maybe we will have him, maybe we won't. And I did some games that year with some help and some work for CBS Sports, and we cut the tapes and gave them to ESPN, and they played them in front of the committee, and the committee reluctantly was okay with it my second year. So it was a thank God for John Vasallo who said, no, like, I see something here. And then I did the second year, and again, it wasn't good, but it was at least like I probably was a C minus. Like I went from an F to a C minus, which is considerable improvement with not a lot of reps, because TV is all about reps. And I was chasing the reps as much as I could. I was doing games on American Sports Network, which, again, nobody's ever heard of American Sports Network. Doing games like, I would literally get like Clarkson versus St. Lawrence, right? Like the game that like no one else wanted to go drive up and do. I'd be driving 7 hours, like, doing that type of shit. And I just started chipping away, and the hardest thing about doing TV is watching your tapes, because, man, it's painful to hear yourself talk. Like, it's painful. I'm sure when you edit your podcast, there's probably times where you're just like, oh man, like, that's how it sounds. It just, human nature says that, right? And it was a struggle, man. And one of the biggest struggles was actually the criticism on Twitter. Those first couple of years, like, that really made me think, like, maybe I don't want to do this. Like, I'm not very good at it, which I know I'm not very good at it, because, like, I know this isn't going well. And the beating I was taking on social media, like, never anything close to the beating. Like, I never got it that bad as a player. So, all that, I was just kind of like, holy shit, like, maybe this isn't for me. But again, I had some good people, like John Vasallo being one of them, kind of stuck with me, kept sort of rolling me into the NCAA tournament. And then after my third NCAA tournament, I really sort of started to settle in, and I'll never forget, like, they put me between the glasses for the championship game between Penn State and Denver in the Cincinnati Regional my third year. And they were kind of like, oh, this is kind of interesting. And they had never done between the benches for NCAA before. And then, like, the next year I moved up a crew. I went from the fourth crew to the third crew, right? There's the A, B, C, D, or 1, 2, 3, 4. John Butchergross, Barry Melrose were number one. Sean Richland, Clay Matvick, they were like the second crew. And then you had like sort of rotating cast for third and fourth. And then after my third year, John Vasallo said, hey, I'm considering moving you to the number one crew and put you between the benches. Like, what do you think? And I'm like, yeah. And he's like, we're going to do a test run at Wisconsin in 2 weeks. And I'm like, okay. And we get to Wisconsin, and there's no between the bench spot. The benches are connected. And so thank God I had a relationship with Tony Granato, and he they built me a spot on Wisconsin's bench.
Wow.
Literally. So, like, I was with the D on Wisconsin's bench doing the broadcast as my first ever, my audition to go to the number one crew for ESPN. And he obviously liked what he saw. Did Buffalo Frozen 4 with those guys. Time of my life. I mean, working with Barry Melrose and John Butchergross. John Butchergross, one of my best friends in the world. Barry Melrose, an absolute, an icon in the sport of hockey. I've been yelling and screaming that he should be in the Hall of Fame, and everyone's like, well, his career wasn't very good. And I'm like, listen, the words hockey and fame should be the two most important words for the Hockey Hall of Fame. And more people know who Barry Melrose is than half of the players that go into the Hall of Fame.
That's so true.
So, honor of a lifetime working with Barry Melrose, right? Literal honor of a lifetime. Greatest guy in the entire world. Sweetest man in the entire world. And I got to do that, and the ball just sort of started rolling, Vinny. But there was a lot of tape. There was a lot of criticism and feedback. My boss at ESPN was highly critical of my work, but in a loving way. Again, just wanted me to get better, nitpicked me. We went through tapes. We'd get on Zoom. And it sort of led me down a path where then I kind of landed a job with the Flyers, did some TV for those guys, kept growing my work with ESPN to the point where, Barry retired, and they came to me and they said, look, like, we can add someone else, but like, we think it'd just be better to let you kind of take over full duty with Butchie, and you guys work well together. We'll get you a reporter, and led me to Chicago. They watched me in the Frozen Four one year, and they hired me as, you and I worked for the Blackhawks together. And what an interesting experience that was for the two of us. Different experiences, but very interesting with some of the things that we saw. And we have different opinions of people that we worked with, and we saw things differently and all that. And obviously that is healthy in my opinion, right? And it's normal.
Diversity.
But it's sort of led me down this path, and look, I'm at a point now where I say no to certain things just because they don't really work, and I don't want to be away from my family. For certain things with broadcasting. I've had NHL opportunities come up that required me to move, and I think I'm at a point in my life, Vinny, where like I don't need to be on TV. If I am, great. If I'm not, no big deal. But I'm not moving ever again for a team. Those days are done. I guess maybe the Boston Bruins would be the one exception to that, because I could see my family living in Boston, and that's pretty much the lens I look at everything through. It's the one place I'd be willing to move, would be the city of Boston to work in television. But other than that, there's nowhere that I'm moving. So if I can't commute, it doesn't work. And it's opened up this next chapter, being involved in hockey, and I get to work for, Nation Network, which is, Daily Faceoff is obviously a subsidiary of Nation Network. I do my morning show, which is probably the most fun I've ever had in hockey media, because there's no guardrails. I can say whatever I want. I can piss off whomever I want. It's actually encouraged. I hold back nothing. And people get to see how I genuinely feel about everything, and whether it's popular or unpopular, usually unpopular, I don't really care. And because I have a lot of fun doing it, and it's really led me down this path of, again, being involved in the game and being paid to give an opinion about a game that I love. And I started this by saying everything I have in this world stems back to the sport. And the game, and it's why I owe it everything, and I'm so grateful for the game of hockey, because every dollar I earn right now, I mean, obviously, like, sure, we all have our investments and our stocks and this and that, and maybe that doesn't directly connect to hockey, but the money that I have that goes into that all comes from various teams and networks and all about the game of hockey. So it sort of circles me all the way back around to how this game has given me everything.
Right. Yeah. Amen to that. Amen to that. I feel you on that, brother. But it's amazing, right? Of just how much you've learned and evolved through the sport. And like you said, the gratitude towards it, the lessons, the evolution of going into broadcasting. And now it's amazing of pivoting into what I love a lot. And this would be really interesting to hear your lens on. Now you got into coaching.
Yeah.
And so what an amazing lens to go through, from the playing days, the adversity, championship, to, all right, I'm going to give this broadcasting thing a shot, learn a lot about the ins and outs there, and then boom, I'm getting into coaching. So talk about what that transition's been like, and how you've had to shift your mindset, almost, because it's interesting how you go from, all right, I played, I was a professional, I ended up having a successful, career there, to then going into now broadcasting, having a really successful career there. What's it been like going back now and trying to shape the minds of young men? What's one of the biggest things, like as you've stepped into coaching, that you found that maybe, like you said, a lot of stuff was like, oh, this is so easy. This is so easy. What did that look like to you of the easy part? This is so easy versus holy cow, this is so tough. Like, what's the biggest thing like that you're struggling with that's like been challenging to make that transition into this felt really easy, but this has been really challenging?
Yeah. Listen, coaching is far and above the most difficult thing that I've ever done in hockey. And it's not even close. It really isn't. And, I think one of the things that's so difficult is, how do you, first off, a lot of the things that I learned that I liked, you can't teach them that way anymore. Some of the most impactful moments I ever had are stories that I had with moments with coaches that they wouldn't want me to say publicly now. And even though I appreciate them now, they would not want me to share it publicly because they were ugly moments by the standards of today's society. Things were said, there might have even been, physical altercation, stuff like that, right? People putting their hands on you putting their hands on them, like heat of the moment type of shit. So I think that's been a challenge, is like, how do you teach them that important message, but doing it completely different? I think the other thing I've realized is you gotta, look, I basically talk for a living. And with players, you have to be so careful with your word economy because they'll tune you out. And you have to be so careful because when you're talking to one player, you're basically, what I've come to learn is if I talk to a guy privately, it'll make its way all the way around the team. Even if I'm giving them praise or if I'm giving them, criticism, you're not going to do it, but you might as well be talking to 25 guys, even though you're having a one-on-one conversation. And I learned that as well. And it's not like I've had any horrible moments with that, but there were definitely times where maybe I trusted a guy and said, look, like, I want to talk about this with you because I trust you and I think you see the game a little differently than some other guys. And I want your opinion on this, or I'd like to see your point of view on it. And like I said, I could just see it go around the dressing room. And so I think dealing with realizing that, like, there's not a lot of private moments on a sports team. And I guess I should know better because the minute you get called into the coach's office and you come out, even in my career, the boys are all like, well, what happened? What'd they say? You know what I mean? So I probably should have known better. And I think, again, like, I have high standards for these guys, probably too high. And I want them to push themselves to be just like, I think like execution and work ethic, these are all things that, like, doesn't matter how talented you are, you can do. And I just think finding different ways to hold guys accountable without being an asshole, because it's really easy to just be an asshole, especially for me. It's really natural. It's really natural. So I try to do what I loved so much about Coach Parker. I try to make them realize, like, I don't want to have this hierarchy of power over you. It's not how I want to operate. I'd like this to be more of a partnership. And how do you operate within a partnership, though, where you're the majority shareholder? You know what I mean? And just trying to learn how to constantly do that. And I think this season, especially because a lot of the players are guys that I personally brought in here. Last year was an inherited group. This year is a lot more faces of ours. But I just think how to operate day to day with that type of stuff, Vinny. And I think the on ice part is I don't want to say it's the easiest part because none of it's really easy. But it's the more natural part, the on ice part. I just think it's dealing with the transactions and guys who aren't performing. And like, I have a player on the team right now who I really like. It's a young guy, and I could just tell, like, his confidence is, like, just in the gutters, and just like trying to pull him out of that. But like, when you're not playing well, I can't be throwing you out on the power play to get you the confidence, right? Because you're struggling in those situations. So like, how do you set a player up for success without hurting the team when a guy's not performing, when you want to find him confidence, right? And I think those are things that, like, I don't have an answer for you. I'm trying to learn, and no two guys are the same. You can't deal with every player the same. You know,
Right.
your 20-year-old who's played 350 junior games, you can't deal with him the way you're dealing with the 18-year-old. I got a 16-year-old goaltender,
Mm.
right? Who's a legitimate NHL prospect. Now granted, he's a goalie. I really don't deal with goalies at all.
Mm.
I just kind of smile at them and say good job, because they're goalies. I have nothing to offer them, and I know that. So, you know, I think those have been sort of the biggest challenges and continue to be the biggest challenges. It's not breaking film down. It's not doing video one-on-one and showing the guys the habits and what they need to do better. It's just really getting them to, I think realize that the more the team does well, the more individual success you will most likely have. But it's really more just dealing with the interpersonal day-to-day of coaching. These are 18, 19, 20-year-old guys that some of them are seeing the window on their dream close. Some of them are coming to the realization that their dream has come to an end. With the new landscape, the mountain to get where they want to get has sort of become unattainable for a number of them. How do you keep those guys motivated? How do you keep those guys from motherfucking you behind your back every time you do something they don't like? I'd say those are all the things that I am still trying to figure out and learn, and that's probably what's driving me to continue to keep doing this, is feeling like I don't have any of that stuff figured out. And I'm continuing to evolve and try. And sometimes it's no different than being a parent. You know, I have a 3 and a 1-year-old, right? And you've spent time with my kids, and
Mhm.
I'm kind of hard. Like I have my moments where sometimes people look at me and they're like, "Your daughter's not even 3. Why are you being so demanding about her manners?" And it's like, well, I don't know. Like, I just am. It's just what I think is the right thing to do. That's my style. And the second you think you have something figured out with one guy, with the next guy, you got to do it totally different. So I think now I have awareness to that in year 2. And now it's like trying to figure out how to deal with these situations. And listen, I pulled a referee aside a couple weeks ago on a Tuesday night, because I had him the previous weekend. And it's funny, like, the officials don't really get under my skin, but the linesmen do. And they're very young guys, and I find them to be super disrespectful. Like, you can't even have a conversation with them. They just, like, I don't know, they're young. They think they're hot, something to prove. They're 20. A lot of them are 21, 22 years old, and they're like snarky little dickheads. And so they really get under my skin. But I haven't had a lot of issues with refs, and I really shouldn't, even with a linesman, a 22-year-old dickhead kid. Like, what am I doing arguing with that? It's just so stupid, and it's distracting to the team. But a couple weeks ago, I got pretty frustrated with an official because one of my players got hurt. And there's only one official. There's not two. So, like, how are they supposed to see everything? It happened behind the play, but, like, my guy got hurt. One of my smaller players was a dirty play. I really didn't like it. And it was real quiet, and I yelled, and I put him on blast a little bit in front of everybody else, and then he yelled back. And, I drove home that night from, I don't remember exactly, I think we were in New England somewhere, 5 hours, just, like, annoyed at myself, because I was like, it's embarrassing to do that. Like, you should be better than that. And I pulled him aside on Tuesday when we played on Tuesday, and I apologized to him, and he was great about it, because he's not a 21-year-old guy. He's probably 30. And he was like, listen, we're all passionate about what we do. I get it. Thanks for apologizing. I know you're not a bad person, whatever. But there are moments like that where I'm like, you feel embarrassed by it, because it's not a good look. Like, again, I should know better. I don't really care what other coaches do, especially at this level, but I should know better than that. And I always had great relationships with officials. I didn't take a ton of penalties. I had good relationships with officials. Like, I always found it therapeutic to chat with refs and linesmen, especially some of the guys in Boston. They're great guys I still see, will go have beers with now and whatnot when I run into them. But I just think learning all how to deal with those situations. Like, last year, I never brought a note card on the bench, like a coaching card. This year I go on the bench. I've got a coaching card. I've got everything written out on that card, every situation. I got my 5-on-3, and I've got a backup player written on that note card for every player on the 5-on-3. If one guy goes out, I've got a 4-on-3. I've got 6-on-5. I've got, two extra righties and two extra lefties for my 6-on-5, and I have that all written out on the card because you get it late in the game, there's a lot of shit going on or whatever, and boom, I just can look at my card and I know who I want to have out there, right? And that's sort of like new for me this season. I never did that last season. So just basically learning your way through it, but it's the interpersonal stuff that is, in my opinion, the bigger challenge than the actual hockey stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, no, amen to that. It's and that's what makes it run, right? It's like one of the things we'll bring up a lot, right? The system isn't the problem. It's always the humans operating it. And it's the same idea. The game is never the problem. Everyone knows the system, the 1-3-1, the 1-2-2, whatever you want to call it, of different, fundamental systems in hockey. But that's such a major part of the process, is that it's the humans operating it. And that's the challenge with all this stuff, right? Is how do you get that cohesiveness going? And so it's cool to hear you reflect on it and to be able to see that, right? Now, when you think about it as a parent, how much has that impacted your lens and changed how you're approaching things? Like, do you see the correlation of, by being a father, boom, that's kind of changed how I am coaching?
My wife recently reminded me, like, yes, like our kid is advanced, and like we got to remind her though, like when she does things, like even though they're like super small, simple things, like you got to tell her when she does, like if she shares with Shane, I know you expect her to share with him, but you got to tell her, like, that's really good. Good job sharing. You know what I mean? And that's probably one thing. Like sometimes you got to remind people that, like, how valuable doing little things are. And that's, yeah, like that's sometimes all a guy has going for them in a game. And so when you're telling them, like, yeah, like that was a smart little read you made there and like a great offensive zone change. Like, yeah, I expect the guys to do that, but just reminding them, like, that's a good job. It just reinforces it. And now they're probably going to do it next time. And that's like the one thing my wife reminds me with Sloan is like, look, like, I know you expect her to do these things really well. But like when she does them, she's only 2.5. Like, you got to tell her good job. Like, you got to tell her, like, that was really gentle. Thank you so much for sharing with him. You know what I mean? Like, that was really sweet what you just did for him. Like, you got to let her know. It can't just be, Sloan, you have to share with Shane. Give that back to Shane. Like, so I think though that's probably the biggest crossover for me at this point. Right now is that type of mentality.
Yeah, it's a big one. It's a big one. I mean, one of the things that I always battle with, in my line of work, right, of like mental performance or mindset, whatever you want to call it, of so many people think it's always about the negative or there's something wrong with the person. And they don't realize, but there's a lot of the work that's actually done more so now that people don't realize, like, it's about what's right with you, what you're actually doing well, what strengths you have. And to your point, culturally, and I know this is a lot in a lot of sports culture, especially in high performing culture, even in corporate, you forget. You have to point out the good. You have to actually work on that and cognitively be aware of that and share that with other human beings. And it's wild to me how developers, leaders miss that opportunity and don't realize how far they can get with those they lead from a mindset perspective by simply reminding them of, yeah, that was good. That was good behavior. Like, that's the clarity that, you're able to see. And that, hey, that's what I expect of you. Good job. But we pass over it and we think it's a nothing burger of like, well, that's what you're supposed to do. But it's amazing how often people don't recognize the other side of we're always in fixing mode instead of guiding and recognizing, like, hey, that was really good. Like, imagine how much better cultures would be if there was more of that consistency of pointing out what you're actually doing right? Because majority of the time you are doing a lot of those little things consistently right, but we just don't talk about it. We don't point it out.
And I think there's also, Vinny, and I've started to learn this, some guys, like, they tune that out and they find that disingenuous. And you have to learn.
It's disingenuous, right? If you're not sharing.
Yeah, but I'll be honest with you. Like, I see the little things. Like, I'm a details guy. Like, I appreciate certain little things, especially things that I thought that were important as a player that I did, that maybe I didn't think were as appreciated as they should have been. And so I do think sometimes, like, a guy can feel like almost like they can shrug that off. And so like, again, that's like another thing where like you have to learn your players. Like you have to know which guys are driven by that and which guys aren't. Because not everybody is like, and I have one in particular that like I'm thinking about, and obviously I'm not going to share ever a player's name or exact situation, but I do have a certain player like that where I'm trying to point out the positive things that he does because, you know, I think that it's been a little bit of a struggle for him. And I almost feel like he has this he's almost annoyed by it. And that's okay. I'm not gonna stop doing it because I do find these things to be valuable. But maybe for him, he's already kind of in this like feeling sorry for himself, like, you know, these coaches don't like me mode, which is what most players default to. I mean, that's just reality.
Yeah, exactly. And and you nailed it. It is the reality, right? But that's why the battle from a coaching standpoint, leadership standpoint is the more you get to know them, you know, and that's what we always have to be careful of as leaders of what we think the perspective is of the player, as opposed to realizing, all right, well, what am I modeling? What am I sharing? And being patient, right? That's so much of the process of coaching is the patience, right? Of if the reps, eventually it shows up.
Yeah.
So intuitively you're feeling it. So you know what to go off of. You know, Colby has been awesome, right? Your story, such a powerful example of evolution, and not just as an athlete, but obviously as a human being. And so if you left our listeners with one thing, if you had to give today's athletes, leaders, one message about evolving their mindset, what would that be? What would you want to leave with?
I just think that like one thing I think most people need to do is when everybody is sort of telling you something, chances are, especially if it's people you trust, chances are like you're lacking self-awareness. And once you open your eyes to self-awareness and you're willing to be your own harshest critic, I think it gives you the opportunity to change and to grow and to do different things. Because, you know, like if you put yourself in a situation and you're having like the same outcome over and over again, and you're just constantly like, well, they don't like me. Well, they don't like me. Like chances are it's you. And you're unwilling to be self-aware to change. You know, and that's personally and professionally and all of the above. So I just think like surround yourself with good people that aren't just going to bullshit you, but then actually be open to what they tell you, right? Be self-aware. You can't fix a problem until you're catching yourself do it. Listen, when I broadcast, when I like, hey, you're using this phrase too much, you're doing it, until I hear myself do it in the moment, I can't fix it, no matter what. Until I feel myself crossing over that extra time on the ice, even though you're telling me I'm doing it, I can't correct it until I finally feel myself do it and go, oh, wait, yeah, I am. You know what I mean? So open yourself up and to self-awareness as best as you can, because if you don't do that, like it's going to be tricky. It is, unless you're just the best player and you're just so much better than everyone else that the rules won't apply to you. And there are outliers. There are exceptions to every rule. Most likely you won't be one of them, though.
Yeah. Amen to that, brother. So where can our listeners find you, follow your work, or listen to your insights?
Morning Cup of Hockey. It's on Daily Faceoff's YouTube. And then they stream it on podcasts, Spotify, all those, Monday to Thursday, 9 a.m. live on Twitter and again, YouTube, Twitter, all of the like live platforms. And then, yeah, audio on the audio version is Spotify and podcast. And, you know, if there's a college hockey game, most likely you'll, on ESPN, on national TV, most likely you'll hear my voice doing it. So,
yeah, that's awesome. Well, appreciate you taking the time, brother. And I know it's tough. It's getting late and all that stuff, but I appreciate you jumping on.
All right. I always got time for you, my friend.
Yeah, hell yeah, brother. So remember, evolving as an athlete is a privilege. Every day you get to show up in this world, the conditions you face, people around you, challenges in front of you, right? They're all shaping you into an incredible human being long before they ever shape you into a player. Never forget that.
True.
You know, and if this episode resonated with you, share with someone who's on their own path, a teammate, a coach, parent might be, right? Or anyone else who's growing through their journey. That's how we keep building this community of evolving athletes. As always, thank you for coming and sharing the time with us, and play for that feeling.